We will continue with program 1.2, but before we do, I'll just advise that we have released the Clean Energy Regulator, Threatened Species Scientific Committee, the Australian Institute of Marine Science and the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority. Those agencies will not be required today. Thank you. Over to Senator Payman.
Thank you, Chair. My question's around the gas inquiry, December 2024 interim report. In January, the ACCC released this report which projected that there was the potential for structural gas shortfalls on the East Coast from 2027. End quote. The agency recommended that the government develop a gas market system plan to prepare for future shortages. I understand that the government has the future gas strategy to inform gas's role in the transition to net zero, but does the government or does the department know if the government intends to develop a plan in line with ACCC's recommendation for the gas market system?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. Earlier today we had a series of questions that were around the energy planning process more broadly, and in that context I answered questions around the integrated system plan. In that sense, in reviewing the work that's done on the east coast of Australia by AEMO, one of the clear recommendations coming out of the review there was that we better integrate thinking around future gas needs with future electricity needs. So there is a recognition that we need to essentially have a gas planning framework that is broadly equivalent to what we now have today in the electricity sector. So yes, there is a recognition of the need to do that, absolutely.
Is there a timeline on when that might take place? Because obviously 2027 isn't too far away.
Yeah, so Senator, just on that, so what you're referring to there is the most recent report published by the ACCC in December. So there, just to make sure people understand, the East Coast gas market is anticipated to have a surplus in 2025 in the order of 77 to 112 petajoules. But when looking forward, one of the things that AEMO does through its gas statement of opportunities is to identify where there's an opportunity for more investment to bring on more gas supply in order to meet projections of demand. And so in that context, at the moment they are forecasting that there could be effectively more demand than there is supply out in 2027. But importantly, they make the point that the additional supply commitments that the government secured through the mandatory code of conduct would be sufficient to push that back from 2027 to 2028. So at the moment we have 604 petajoules of gas that have been committed, additional petajoules of gas committed to the domestic market to 2033, 269 petajoules to 2027. So that's helped to, in a sense, delay the point at which gas demand exceeds gas supply.
And beyond the 2028, what potential action will we be taking, or will the government take to ensure that there's that reliable supply of gas for Australians?
So this was a key theme of the future gas strategy that you referred to earlier, Senator, which is the recognition of the need to ensure that we're continuing to invest in gas supply to meet our own domestic gas needs, but also to meet the contractual needs of the LNG exporters. So, the future gas strategy effectively talked to the sorts of issues that would need to be considered on the supply side. So it gets to issues like unlocking new gas fields, exploration, etc. From that point of view. And so really it's, the future gas strategy in a sense laid out the broad strategic framework. In addition to that, at the last Energy and Climate Ministerial Council meeting that was held in December, this was a key topic of discussion. And coming out of that work, or that discussion, ministers tasked their senior officials, so both the Commonwealth and the states and territories, with working together to come back to them with options for addressing projected gas supply shortfall risks. We're in the process of putting together that advice with the states and territories at the moment, with the intent of coming back to the first Energy and Climate Ministerial Council meeting this year, which is scheduled for the 14th of March.
14th of March, okay. Yep. 14th of March, we'll keep an eye out for that one. How much gas did Australia use last year? Are you able to give me a breakdown by state and territory?
So, Senator, if you bear with me for a moment.
No worries.
I may have that information for you. So I could give you a total fuel consumption figure for gas in 2022-2023. So in petajoules, 1,518 petajoules of gas was consumed in Australia in that financial year.
2022-23. We don't
right.
have the figures for 23-24.
That comes from the Australian energy statistics, and unless one of my colleagues corrects me, I think that's the latest data that has been published.
And on notice, are you able to provide the breakdown by state and territory?
Let me just see, Senator, whether I have that for you now. If
No
not,
worries.
no, I don't. I'll have to take that one on notice.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And maybe on notice as well, how much gas did Australia export last year or in the financial year of 2022-23? And if we can also have a breakdown by state and territory.
Great. Thank you, Senator. I'll take that
Thank
on
you.
notice.
That's all from me. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Senator Billick.
Thank you. I just wanted to talk about nuclear. I understand some representatives from the department attended the House Committee inquiry into nuclear power generation last year. Were you there, Mr Duggan?
Yes, I was, Senator.
You were? Great. I'll just wait till the others get to the table. So thank you. I'm just wondering if you could remind us of the expected timelines required to progress a nuclear power station from concept to design, community and government engagement, and right through to approval.
So I will give my colleague the opportunity to answer that question, who answered it so expertly in the House inquiry.
Ms McLaughlin.
Thank you very much, Senator. Claire McLaughlin, Head of Division Energy Performance and Security. The answer is at least a decade to put in place the regulatory and other systems to support nuclear power in Australia.
At least?
Yep.
Minimum?
Yes.
Okay. Are you able to tell me what's the average lifespan of a coal fire station?
So on average, a coal-fired power station, this is work, I believe, coming out of the Clean Energy Council, looked at it, and the average life of a coal-fired power station is about 42 years.
42?
That's correct.
And sorry, I'm a bit deaf in one ear, so. What about the average age of coal-fired power fleet in Australia?
So the average age today of our existing coal-fired power fleet is 35 years.
And what's the average cost of extending them beyond their productive life? Does it require significant investment?
Yeah, so Senator, we haven't done cost calculations of the cost of extending coal-fired power for the reason that we support the government to implement its policies, and it's not the government's policy to extend coal-fired power stations.
Okay. So if Australia's energy grid was to extend coal until 2040, when the experts are saying that nuclear could begin delivering power, are you able to tell me what cost would that be in terms of, I suppose, reliability and also in terms of maintenance?
Yeah, so Senator, we're now at the point where we have, it's in the order of a dozen coal-fired power facilities. The answer to that question will be different for each of them. They're all at different stages of their productive life. In order to do a cost calculation like that, you need to understand their operations and their technologies fairly well. It's not something that we've done calculations of. From a qualitative point of view, I mean, clearly, were you to seek to extend any type of electricity generation asset beyond its existing productive life to have it in the system for longer, you'd anticipate there to be rising maintenance costs. The older the kit, the more maintenance it requires, but also you get to a point where at some point you would need a significant capital investment in the plant in order for that to then remain a productive, reliable plant going forward. But as I said earlier, we haven't done the calculations for me to be able to say what the cost of that would be per se.
Okay. Just the Australian Energy Market Operator and the ISP is the basis for a lot of the government departments' decision-making when it comes to the energy system mix. So can you explain how this and the electricity statement of opportunities deal with our changing energy mix in coming years?
Yeah, so the integrated system plan effectively provides a set of what's described as least cost development pathway for consumers over different time horizons that are consistent with government policies. So important, of course, set of government policies in that regard, both state and federal, are the emissions reduction policies. So essentially what the integrated system plan does is provide different scenarios for how you could achieve that objective and different costs associated with those scenarios. So that, in a sense, provides a pathway of new generation, storage, transmission assets, etc., gas-fired firming capacity that you need in order to meet projections of electricity demand in 2030 and 2050. The electricity statement of opportunities published by AEMO looks at the extent to which, on the basis of the existing and committed projects, we're able to meet the level of demand that's projected to a very high level of reliability. So at the moment, under the interim reliability standard, the objective there is to achieve 99.9998% reliability in the grid. So meet the energy needs of the electricity grid 99.9998% of the time. Based on those standards, then AEMO produce, in a sense, an estimate of unmet need, so that 0.0002%, and they project whether or not there is a need for additional investment in order to close that gap. And what we've seen over time is that often industry will respond because they'll see a market opportunity, and so you'll see industry invest in order to close that perceived reliability gap over time.
Do current government policy settings, including the capacity investment scheme, provide for projected energy needs until 2030? And how much new energy is required?
Yeah, so Senator, the capacity investment scheme is designed effectively to achieve the pathway to 82%, effectively replacing the coal generation assets that we anticipate will retire over that period. So AEMO anticipates that around 90% of the existing coal generation fleet will retire over the next decade. The capacity investment scheme provides the firmed renewable generation capacity that will provide for the electricity supply prior to that departure of those coal-fired power assets. So in a sense, it's trying to get the supply in to ensure that we retain reliability while coal-fired power is effectively scaling down and coming out of the system. So it's expected to support in the order of $70 billion worth of investment over time. The expectation is that in the AEMO's electricity statement of opportunities, they've factored in the first tender from the capacity investment scheme, but not all the subsequent tenders. Once those subsequent tenders were factored in and we see the projects come through the capacity investment scheme, you'd anticipate that that will make a significant contribution to reliability in the system.
Does the CIS represent value for money? Does it provide policy certainty to encourage investment in renewable energy?
Yeah, so the capacity investment scheme, what it is effectively a revenue underwriting instrument. So what it does is there are a number of course unknowns in the energy transition. One of those unknowns, for example, is the time period over which the capacity that it's seeking to replace, so largely coal-fired power generation, will exit the market. That uncertainty has significant implications for projections that investors make when they think about what the revenue outlook would be of a new investment. Other uncertainties, of course, are depending on how the transition unfolds, what sort of new generation technologies will have entered the system, so the proportion of gas-fired power generation, wind generation, solar generation. Each of those different technologies produce at different costs at different times of day. And so if you're a proponent of one of those technologies, there is a level of uncertainty about what your revenue outlook will look like. So what the Capacity Investment Scheme does is invites competitive bids from the market to provide the minimum amount of revenue underwriting support that is necessary in order to get those investments through to a final investment decision. And so it is a highly competitive auction process. I think I mentioned in response to an earlier question, we've had bids that are sort of 4.5 times the amount of capacity that we're auctioning. And so we're very satisfied that the price that we're paying through the Capacity Investment Scheme on behalf of Australian taxpayers is the lowest price needed in order to provide that additional capacity.
And so that lower price helps provide that certainty?
Yeah, so that provides the certainty for the investors to take the investment decision that's necessary to get that generation capacity online.
There's also been a lot of discussion about baseload power. In the Australian context, where we have the world's largest energy grid, highest rooftop solar penetration and world-class wind and sun resources, what's that mean for traditional ideas of baseload, such as coal or nuclear, versus the more flexible firming options?
Yeah, I think Senator, we are moving to a different type of electricity supply to meet projections of electricity demand. So we still have, it's in the order of about 35 to 40% of our electricity supply is still provided by coal-fired power, which operates at a very high capacity factor, and that's typically the way you would define what a baseload generator would be, so one that's operating most of the time, because it's not very flexible in its ability to flex with changes in demand through the course of a day or a week. But over time, where the system is evolving to is one where there's still, as I said, still 40-odd%, but we've also got more variable renewable energy coming into the system. So that's your solar, that's your wind, but firmed by two important things, well, three. One is batteries. So a lot of, when we do our Capacity Investment Scheme auctions, a lot of the bids that come through for solar projects will often have a battery attached to it. So it, in a sense, is providing its own additional storage capacity at the time. You've got also large pumped hydro projects like Snowy 2.0, providing effectively like a large battery into the grid, more firming capacity. And then we've got gas-fired power generation also providing firming capacity as well. So that combination of more variable, low cost, low marginal cost renewable energy, so combined with battery storage, pumped hydro storage, combined with gas peaking, means that the system is moving away from, over time, and this will happen gradually, away from baseload power into a more flexible system.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Senator Cadell.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. We were on pricing before, and you gave me those prices about the 2095 average bill before any levies, and now before it was at 1,700. So it seems to have gone up a bit over $350. What's the wholesale from quarter one? You're looking at wholesale earlier, quarter one 2022 to say Q4, if you got that by quarters, because I think the promise was that they would go down 18%.
Yeah. So Senator, wholesale prices thus far in 2025 have averaged $104.20 per megawatt hour.
Yep.
In 2024, they averaged $131 a megawatt hour.
Yep.
In 2023, it was $93 per megawatt hour.
Yep.
In 2022, it was $193 per megawatt hour.
So from going through, what was it in 21?
Let me just see whether I have that.
Last full term of us.
$76.
$76. Okay. So that hasn't gone down. How much, given the government came in with three big promises, they would lower the price of electricity, they would go with 82% of renewables and therefore link that to 43%. How, given we aren't meeting 82%, are you confident we'll reach 82% by 2030?
So, Senator, in response to an earlier question, I talked about the fact that we are seeing an acceleration now in the
I understand that. I accept that.
That is consistent with the run rate that we need from this point to get to 82%.
Will we be at 2030? at 82%?
Will we be there? So we certainly would anticipate, if the current, what we're seeing coming through the investment pipeline, we would anticipate that, yes, we're a very good prospect of getting to 82.
I've got concerns that we're able to hear, and we're taking these questions on a nuclear model, that we're spending time doing that, and there's specific political stuff here. We aren't able to get costings on what a total system costs of. We referred to the ISP and what's not included in there, and the works in that. When I asked specifically what the questions were, works in progress or works anticipated that weren't in that, I was given, no, we don't look at that, we don't have those answers. When we're talking about work of, are we going to get to 43, are we going to meet 100% of the government's things to get that, I'm told we don't look at that. How is there time to look at, how much time is the Minister devoting that you look at our policies rather than doing the thing that matter to everyday Australians, such as costs, such as these things?
Senator, I think in fairness, that's not a question that Mr Duggan can answer.
Well, when you get the, if you
Senator,
look at even
Senator, you know he can't answer that question.
The annual climate change statement on your website lists the current words, the means that Australians cannot wait delivery for unaffordable and risky nuclear reactors. Why is that? Are we not seeing independence shattered here? What do we tell our AUKUS partners when we're saying on government website that nuclear reactors are risky? Where is the independence to look at these things if that is the DQ's position?
So, Senator, I think Mr Duggan's given ample evidence about the amount of work that this department does on government policy. Ample evidence on that. And as you and he have discussed in many estimates, it's premised on the advice received from AEMO on the ISP and on the optimal path to reach the government's targets. It's premised on the department doing all the work necessary to provide advice and then run programs which are designed to fulfil the ISP and, as a consequence, to reach those targets. That's the work of the department, and that's the work that the department does.
Senator, I think I understand the sensitivity to transparency. I understand the effort here to try and cover up what an appalling proposal nuclear is for Australia. I understand that you don't want people to reach the conclusion.
You are politicising a good department by making them use language that is politically charged for an outcome.
Senator Cadell,
I haven't talked over the top of you.
One at a time.
It is
I didn't ask this question
an extraordinarily expensive and risky proposal for Australia. Your
and offshore wind is not risky.
Your record...
Floating offshore wind is good.
Again, Chair,
I haven't asked him a question.
No, okay.
I'm answering your question.
We will do this in a respectful manner. You've asked a question that you've asked a question that the Secretary has said it's not appropriate for Mr Duggan to answer. He's answered to his ability. The Secretary has redirected you. The Minister is now hopping in to respond, as that is the way this works. You can ask public servants one question and you can ask ministers different questions.
I asked the department about their decision-making and are they being asked to do this. I didn't ask the government. I asked, my concern was about the politicisation.
I'm entitled to intervene, and I'm intervening.
Who's covering up what then?
Well,
who's covering up what if you need to ask, are you politicising the department?
It's a very interesting question, Senator. Who's covering up what?
It is.
This government... legislated targets, annual statements, transparency here about all of these questions. People can ask sensible questions, they can ask dopey questions. No problems. We're here to answer your questions. The contrast is the sleazy cover-up that Mr Taylor engaged in prior to the last election, where he hid from Australians, went through all of the contrivances to cover up the fact that electricity prices were about to go up by 16%.
Personal reflection?
It was an utterly sleazy partisan effort by Mr Taylor to cover up what they should have known before the last election.
Minister, just one moment. I would ask you to withdraw that reflection.
Cheerfully withdraw.
Thank you kindly.
This is what we are getting to here, is that every time we ask for costings and stuff and the best work, we go, oh, it's the ISP. But the ISP is mandated to meet the government policy of 82%, isn't it, Mr Duggan?
That's correct.
If they said tomorrow it's 100%, that ISP would be out the window because you'd have to come up with a new one, correct?
So the ISP is the optimal development pathway to meet government
policy.
policies.
So it's hamstrung by government policy. So who makes the decision? Does Senator Grogan, the chair here, have to be concerned if they're going to build submarines in South Australia now that risky nuclear reactors will be close to her constituents? Is this what we have to do on your department in this language? Are we now saying to people in Western Australia have to be clear because DQ thinks they're risky nuclear developments?
So, Senator, we have never described that. That is
on your website, DQ Annual Climate Change Statement 2024.
Senator Cadell,
Let them
answer the question without interruption,
So,
please.
Senator, I've never provided any advice which says that has used that language.
Mr. Fredericks?
Never.
On that website?
Senator,
Annual Climate Change Statement 2024.
Which I understand, Minister, would have been
that's
the
the minister's
document.
So on 20, but it's on your website.
But it's the minister's statement.
I just got to deal with a couple of issues that you've raised, if you would allow me to. Inferentially, you made a comment, perhaps you didn't intend it, but to suggest that this department has been politicised. I've been the secretary of this department and its various iterations under both governments, and I can tell you as the secretary, my department conducts itself exactly the same way today as it did 3 years ago and 5 years ago. So I don't feel there's been any change in the way my department conducts itself under my leadership. We conduct ourselves to implement government policy, and we do it very, very well, and we did it very, very well under the previous government. We conduct ourselves, if a minister asks us for information, then we provide the minister with information. That's the same as what I've done with all my ministers. It's not a politicisation for a minister to ask the department for information, and we provide it in good faith. So at the end of the day, I sit here in very good conscience, knowing that my senior leadership and my department conduct ourselves consistently with how we have for 5 years.
And Mr. Fredericks, I hope I said at the beginning, I believe your department tries to do the right thing. I believe it's being pressured into this.
I have to be honest with you. I just don't feel, can I be really honest with you, Sam? I don't feel like I'm under any pressure. I didn't feel like I was under any pressure under coalition ministers, and I don't feel like it under Labor ministers.
But when we get here and everything comes back to it's government policy, we can't, we have to assume that we achieve 82%. Is there no independent... Patton said, if everyone's thinking the same, someone's not thinking. Where is the independent thought that goes into looking at things to make a better Australian energy policy?
But Senator, it's not... You just got to be careful using the language independent. What a department like ours provides, and it's been consistent, is professional advice. So, of course, we provide professional, objective advice to government about how to implement its policies. We've always done that. We also provide professional, objective advice about other policies that it could consider where we see a problem emerging. We have always done that. So it's not a case of us sitting here and not having the capacity to understand, challenge, identify the challenge and identify potential solutions to that challenge whilst implementing the government's policy. That's how government departments work.
That's why
on that independence point, look, I think Mr Fredericks has outlined the public services responsibility here very well. I think you unintentionally, the minister is free to describe bad proposals as bad proposals, risky proposals as risky proposals. He's entitled to use that language, and I think in this case he's right to use that language for all the reasons that we'll no doubt traverse. If you're interested in independent advice, well, you don't have to wait too long, because the Climate Change Authority will be here shortly, and they will have plenty of independent advice that you can ask them questions about, and I'm looking forward to it.
And if we're relying on that for independent advice, I think we're in a whole lot of more trouble. But
well, there you go again. The
if you want to send a press release out on the day you're appearing before estimates, you forgo your independence.
The problem is, if you formulate policy in the hope that people aren't going to subject it to some scrutiny, well, welcome to first grade, because that is what is going to happen in Canberra is when you have very expensive proposals that force industry offshore and lift costs for ordinary households, you can expect some scrutiny. And I know your side of politics don't like it, but that is what is going to happen. And you can try and shut down criticism and estimates. You can yell at people outside, which is what Mr Dutton and Mr Taylor do, but it will be subject to scrutiny. It is impossible for you to get through the next few months without this very bad proposal being exposed for what it is.
So just for winding up on that, this document is a ministerial document. It's not a departmental document, even though it's got your...
But Senator, at the end of the day, the Australian climate change statement is a statement by the minister.
That's what I'm saying.
It absolutely
is. It's a political document.
It's a statement by which he reports to Parliament, as I recall. But as always been the case, of course, when our minister makes a statement, particularly one as significant as that, then we ensure that it is available publicly through our website.
With your logo and departmental...
There's nothing unusual about that.
I understand, but you can see how a person would say that this is a government department putting out this when there's only the forward by the minister. Yeah,
well, I think you look at that, sure. But once you go into it and understand it's a ministerial document, that's how it's provided to Parliament. Okay. My recollection is it's provided under the force of law.
Yes, correct.
So at the end of the day, I'm very, very comfortable today, as I would have been 4 years ago, in having a document like that on my website with my department's crest on it. It's standard practice,
Happy to hear that.
And nothing's changed.
Okay. Happy to rotate.
No, we're all done.
Well, going on that, if we go back to the things that Minister Ayres just said about we're talking about driving costs and businesses overseas under different policies, today when I was asking specifically about a document, another document, it was a slide presentation on Departmental 2 where the department's talking about 25% more imports of clinker, was talking about 10% less exports of steel, 18% less exports of steel. When we talk of those things, they're the policies that you are looking now under government policies.
No, Senator. Like you couldn't be more wrong.
I'm sorry.
You could not be more wrong.
They were your documents with your numbers. No. I haven't finished my question.
Do not mischaracterise the evidence that was given.
So he can interrupt me.
No, because he's right, because you are mischaracterising
the evidence that was given. The evidence that was given was that the assumptions for that material, which is there to support good decision making, right? Focusing on issues like, don't interrupt, focusing on issues like...
You're interrupting my question, Minister. Who is the cover-up here? Why can't you handle the truth on this?
Senator Goodell, if you don't stop shouting, I will stop this now.
Apparently he can interrupt me and I can't interrupt him.
Well, okay, you made an assertion that...
Minister. Senator Goodell, I could see that you were mischaracterising the evidence that was given to you but a few moments before, and I think that you know that you're doing that. So let's just all take a breath. Appreciate you want to make some points here, but I can assure you I've been working around and in and outside of governments for decades, and the kind of issues you're raising here are standard practice that have been going on forever and ever and ever. And my encounters with this department, both when I've been in opposition, when I've been outside of this circus, and when I've been in government, they are deeply honest, hard-working, professional people who do a great job.
I'm not saying anything about that. I'm saying when the department brings up documentation about driving work overseas, in their own document, says the climate shrinkage risk is 25% more imports on concrete, is 10% less steel exports, and someone else wants to characterise a policy that hasn't been gone through in detail as being the major risk to it.
This is the problem.
So now we'll allow the Minister to respond.
The question is...
And I think, to be fair to Senator Goodell, sometimes he does know when he's mischaracterising it, sometimes he doesn't know that he's mischaracterising it, but you're certainly mischaracterising it. That is material, and the department has undertaken to come back to you about what the assumptions were that sat under that, but is material that is designed to support government making decisions to ensure that manufacturing stays on shore, to support government decision making, to ensure that the framework here supports low-cost, reliable electricity for industry. So that they are entitled to come back to you about that, and they will. The alternative, and the reason I object so much is that your plan, core to your plan, it doesn't go anywhere without it, is that 50% of industrial loads for electricity-intensive industry has to move offshore. That's Mr Taylor and poor old Mr O'Brien and Mr Dutton's plan. Their dodgy, risky nuclear plan requires Australian manufacturing to close and go offshore in order to make room for expensive nuclear reactors that would start providing electricity in the mid-2040s. So don't mischaracterise the work that these people are doing to try and create a fig leaf over your... it's not a mischaracterisation. It is core to the Dutton nuclear plan, is forcing electricity-intensive manufacturing offshore.
Okay.
It's there in black and white.
Senator Davey, you don't have the call. All right. Senator Cadell, this is your last question, and we are rotating because Senator Van has some other questions. Thank you, Minister. Senator Cadell, if you have one last question.
So you have all the assumptions to make comments on our policy, and you can do that off the cuff now, but you don't have the assumptions on all these other things that are actually your policy and in your documents to give full detailed answers now. That's what you're saying to me.
Mr Duggan can answer your questions in enormous detail.
No, you just said then, assumptions in nuclear, you know it all right, we're sending 50% offshore, we know all this, you've got that down pat.
Well,
but I have to give time, so assumptions of a document your government produced and requested
it's in black and white.
Can be given to me.
It's in black and white in the Dutton document.
It's in black and white in my document.
Nuclear plan that sends manufacturing offshore. That's what it's all about.
Okay, and now we are going to rotate the call to Senator Van.
Thank you, Chair. Mr Duggan, or it might be better off going to Mr Plant, so he's Head of the Office of Energy Economics. On a question on notice, could you provide us with a breakdown of the utilisation of the existing interstate interconnectors by use, let's say, an average per day over a 12-month period?
Yeah, Senator, we can take that one on notice.
Is that clear enough?
Yep.
Great,
Notice,
thank you. Appreciate it.
Senator Blythe.
Thank you. We'll sort of move, I guess, into gas and the cost of gas prices currently in the market. So, given the uncertainty around energy demand and the transition to renewables, can the department confirm that gas generation is still a necessary part of Australia's energy mix in all scenarios, particularly as a reliable backup to renewables during peak demand periods and extreme weather events?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. So, I mean, absolutely. So as we transition away from coal, we do think that gas will continue to play an important role in Australia's electricity sector. So again, that is part of the optimal development path that we've been talking about in the integrated system plan. So effectively, what's projected in the integrated system plan is that we'll need in the order of 15 gigawatts of gas-fired power generation capacity for peak loads and firming by 2050. So when you break that down, we've got about 11.5 gigawatts of capacity, gas-fired power capacity at the moment. About 9.3 gigawatts is forecast or announced to retire. So you'd need that capacity to be replaced and another 3.5 gigawatts added. But again, one distinct difference here is we're moving to a more flexible use of gas in the future. So the expectation is that that gas, when it operates, it will be very important to provide the firming, in a sense, the security to the electricity system. But we expect it to just operate broadly around 5% of its total potential. So, as I said, critical when it's needed, but not needed very often. And I should say, and implicit in my answer about it being part of the optimal development pathway, renewable energy generation supported by that peaking gas-fired power generation is the lowest cost pathway, we think, in order to take us through to net zero in 2050.
Thank you. And I guess moving along to the ACCC report, which is showing the current gas price at around $15, and there was supposed to be a price cap of $12 in the gas code. Based on that, do you think the gas code is working?
Senator, yes, I do. I think so. There's a couple of elements around the gas code that are really important to keep in mind. One is, as you referred to it, the reasonable price benchmark of $12 that's in there, $12 per gigajoule. But alongside that, the opportunity for additional gas supply into the market for producers of that additional gas supply to come to the government and seek a ministerial exemption from that reasonable price benchmark of $12. And as I indicated in my earlier evidence, what we've seen is that has worked. So we've got an additional 604 petajoules of gas to 2033 now coming forward as a result of those ministerial exemptions from the reasonable price mechanism of the code. What that gas will do, that additional gas supply, it will put downward pressure on prices into the medium term. So for any given level of demand, the gas code, by bringing forward more supply, will put downward pressure on price.
When do you think consumers will actually see that
so I think
reduced?
consumers are seeing that today, Senator, because if I compare that to what in a sense, if you're an LNG exporter and you face a choice between either exporting your gas into Asia or selling into the domestic market, the domestic market price at the moment is around $13 per gigajoule. The price that they can get when we net it back to their cost structure in Australia, they could get $19 in Asia. So I do think we are seeing Australians paying lower gas prices as a consequence a consequence of this regulatory framework.
And I guess, sorry, I'll just... there's some...
Sorry to interrupt, Senator Blythe. It's probably useful to point out Mr Duggan's outline of the prices now. Of course, is absolutely correct about now. Prices were when we were elected in 2022. Prices were north of $31. The impact of that illegal and immoral invasion of Ukraine, in terms of its impact on gas prices, was very substantial, and a considerable amount of work has been done. But we've come from some very high and challenging numbers for industry.
And I guess the assumptions about a projected shortfall in the market, you're saying that you don't see that as being the case?
So what those additional supply commitments have done, as I said in earlier evidence, is it's pushed back the projections for when we'll reach the point where demand could potentially outstrip supply. But as I mentioned, one of the reasons AEMO produces the gas statement of opportunities is precisely to communicate to the market where there's the opportunity for more investment. And so we would expect to see more come forward. And in fact, we can see a pipeline of activity there that will support more gas supply into the market. But I indicated earlier that energy ministers have asked their senior officials to come back to them with advice at the first meeting of this year with additional options for them in order to ensure that we don't see any gas supply shortfalls into the medium term, including thinking about an extension of AEMO's powers. So AEMO at the moment has the capacity to operate in the market to deal with emergency. What this piece of advice asks us to do is to consider whether we can expand that so AEMO has more of a role into the medium term to ensure that those shortfall risks aren't realised into the future.
Okay, thank you. That's all the questions I had.
Thank you. I think we are all done. Thank you very much. We will now release program 1.2. And I will ask officers from the Australian Renewable Energy Agency to come to the table.
No.
David, do you have questions for these guys? Check in towards the end, see if something's come up. I'll check in towards the end, see if anything's come up.